and welcome to Mark's Kitchen. We're gonna make pretzels today. Get a hold of this. We got a 1/4 cup of water. We're gonna add some yeast. Calls for 1 tablespoon. And we're gonna let that sit with some sugar in there. 2 teaspoons sugar. And this is called proofing. It's gonna let the yeast start to activate and rise. And we're gonna mix that around. Yeast, warm water, and sugar. And we're gonna just let that sit for 5 minutes. The yeast is getting foamy. Okay, the yeast has sat for about 5 minutes, and we're going to add the yeast to 4.5 cups of flour. Okay, that's 4.5, and we'll add the yeast as well as some salt and water. We're gonna add 2 teaspoons salt and 1.5 cups of warm water. And then we're going to mix that by hand. I'm just gonna use a spoon. A spoon to get it started, and then I'm gonna use my hands. And this is starting to come together. It's a little bit dry, so I'm gonna add a tiny bit more warm water. It doesn't take much, just enough that it's gonna all come together. Okay, we're gonna make sure this is nice and mixed, and it's fairly pliable, not too dry. So then we're gonna knead the dough for about 5 minutes. And that means basically you're kind of mixing it by folding and smushing it together. And if you kind of notice the consistency, you'll see that it changes over time as we knead the dough, and it's stretching out the little fibers of the gluten and stuff. It's kind of the magic of bread. And I think this actually is a little too dry. It should be easier to knead, so I'm going to add just a tiny bit of water. Okay, I'm going to keep kneading it for about 5 minutes, and it gets kind of smooth. It's kind of interesting. So we knead the dough for about 5 minutes, and you'll see it gets really smooth and becomes more like stretchy. Changes consistency. We knead it for 5 minutes, and then we're just gonna let it rest. We're gonna let it sit here for a couple minutes. Right now it's like really springy, almost like gummy, like a rubber band, and it'll kind of relax, and then we can work with it more if we let it sit. Okay, let me try this with a slightly bigger cutting board. I think maybe I'll have a little more luck with it. Okay, so the next step is to add butter to the dough, and some recipes say you can do this in the previous step, mixing it in the bowl, and I think that would be just as easy. This butter is a little bit cold, but okay, So the next step is to add butter to the dough. And some recipes say you can do this in the previous step, mixing it in the bowl, and I think that would be just as easy. This butter is a little bit cold. Okay, so the next step is to add butter to the dough. And some recipes say you can do this in the previous step, mixing it in the bowl, and I think that would be just as easy. This butter is a little bit cold. Okay, so the butter gets incorporated, the dough gets smooth again, and I'm going to keep kneading a little bit to get back to that smooth, springy consistency, and then we'll let it sit again. Because right now we won't be able to roll it out. I'm going to roll it out and cut my pretzels, the strips. Some people make it into little balls and then stretch it out, but that takes a long time. So I like to just kind of roll it out flat and then use a pizza wheel to cut my strips. Okay, I kneaded that for a bit, so we'll let it rest, and then we'll roll it out. Okay, I let it rest. It's risen a tiny bit, that's no problem. We are gonna roll this thing out, and it's super stretchy. It's like totally different from how it felt before. It's a very different feeling. All that gummy rubberiness is gone. And I'm not gonna go too crazy here because our pretzels, they can all be kind of different. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, as they say. I'm gonna get it kind of uniform thickness, and it's about 12 or 14 inches wide. That's great. Okay. And then I'm going to use a pizza dough cutter. First, I'll kind of get these corners kind of equal. And then I'm going to roll like 1-inch strips. That way, it's just quicker. These all exactly the same width. We're going to put these on cookie sheets with wax paper, and this is when we kind of make our pretzel shape. I've done them where I just left them as strips like this, and they look great, but I think it's prettier to have this actual pretzel kind of a shape, and I'm just going to start making a bunch of these. And they're gonna rise so the shape will smooth out a little bit on its own. I don't have to get perfectly smooth unrolling it here. This is just to get it close. Let's see. Some people say you should twist over twice. No, there's not good. There's styles. You can actually make whatever shape you want. See, that's with a double twist. Space here. Okay, that is the last one. And we're gonna let those rise in the refrigerator for about an hour. And then we're gonna dip it in a lye solution for 30 seconds, sprinkle it with salt, and bake them. Okay, I baked a couple of those pretzels while they're waiting. I took some out and just baked them without dipping them in the special solution. And just to show you what it looks like without that. So these are, so they're not shiny and they're not very brown. They puffed up quite a bit. Let's see if this is too hot to hold. But, and they, you know, they look beautiful and everything. But you'll see when we do it after we soak it in the lye solution, it's shiny and it gets much more brown, and it adds a tiny bit of a really nice flavor. I mean, it's nice. The salt is really nice, but it doesn't taste like a pretzel. It just tastes like salty bread. Okay, so I have one batch of pretzels baking, just went into the oven, and we're gonna do this second batch, second tray, and I've made my solution of lye and water. 1 ounce of lye, sodium hydroxide. You can buy it on Amazon. You always add the lye to the water, not vice versa. 1 quart of water. I mixed it until it got clear. And what we're gonna do is dip the pretzels in there for 30 seconds each. Doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm gonna do 3 or 4 at a time. Being careful not to splash, and I'm gonna gently push them down to make sure that they get completely covered with the lye, and then we're gonna count to about 30 there. Okay, that's about 30 seconds, and then what I like to do is take the tray over so none of my drips ever go outside of the tray or the bowl. Keeping track that this solution is kind of dangerous, so I'm always trying to not splash and thinking about where everything is, where it's going, what happens if I make a mistake. I have some cider standing by, a big jug of cider, in case there's any spills. The acid of the cider will neutralize the base of the lye. We do 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, and then out. Carefully space the tray up a little bit, so I might get a little more space for this. Like that. And then do the last 3 here. Okay, last 3 out, and watch my drips. And I'll try and sprinkle a little bit of flake salt on. I really use salt on. The flake stuff is traditional. But before I do that, I'm going to very carefully move my lye solution to the sink, and I'm going to add a generous amount of vinegar to neutralize it. And then I've got this awesome flake salt, and I'm going to kind of generously put it on there, crumble it a little bit. These guys in and just keep track. Oh yeah, the first batch is already starting to brown beautifully. Maybe I'll show you. This is after just 5 minutes, and see, they start to brown really nicely. The lye helps give them a nice, beautiful brown color. So we'll see how those look in 15 or 20 minutes. Okay, now it's been about 12 minutes, but these are looking great. I'm at 375. Let's take out this first tray. Would you check that out? Looking awesome. leave the other tray in a little bit longer, but that's just about perfect. Wow, that's fantastic. It has that real pretzel flavor. And they're cooked all the way through. So it didn't take long to cook them, but this is the right amount of time. Okay, that turned out fantastic. They're beautiful. The flavor is incredible. Pretty great. Hey, what more could you want? Now they freeze beautifully. You just throw them in the oven for a couple minutes to serve them again later. So they're kind of a fun thing to make a big batch, and then you can have them whenever you want. Thank you so much for watching.